All right, so here's the question. Would you go bungee jumping? You're watching this online. If you're at our live chat service, I encourage you just write it right there in the chat box right now, just the word yes or the word no. Would you bungee jump? I thought about that this week, and I kind of took the cheater way out. I was like, oh, well, I don't have to answer this right now because, see, I'm injured, so I can't bungee jump. So it's not a question for me. I kind of thought that. And then I watched this YouTube video about a quadriplegic who was strapped into a wheelchair and went bungee jumping. So, yeah, that kind of took away that excuse. So hopefully you've answered by now. You've either written the word yes or no in the chat box there if you're watching at a live chat service. For me, bungee jumping is one of those things that looks kind of cool, but the self-preservation side of me is like, yeah, I think not, probably not. I wonder if that's how grace bombing might come across. Something that sounds kind of cool. It sounds kind of fun. You hear these stories and you think about being on mission with God, and all that sounds kind of cool. But also kind of scary at the same time. And our self-preservation instincts might kick in and say, yeah, I think not. I know, I'm not so sure that's for me. Or maybe they don't say, I think not. Maybe our self-preservation instinct might shout to us, there ain't no way, right? So that's what we're going to talk about today, is this fact that as grace-bombing people, we're likely to face fear. And we might even fail as a result of that fear to go out there and grace bomb. And from one hand, I would say that makes a lot of sense. Putting yourself out there, standing for grace is a scary kind of thing. I made a short list of reasons why it might be scary. There's that fear of the unknown, right? You just don't really know how this is going to play out. You don't know how it'll be received. Right? There's so many things about it that are unknown. There's the personal side, like, what if I mess up? Some of us don't feel like we're really gifted with words, and so, what if I go to do the grace bomb thing and the words just don't come out, or I mess up in some other way, right? And then there's another fear that might hit, and that's the fear of not having enough resources, whether it's your time, money, or ability. That could be scary too. This is one that I've personally faced. One particular occasion, I sensed God really wanted me to grace bomb somebody, but I got my brain thinking very quickly, like, well, if I use that money, because this one involved money, and not all grace bombs do, but this one involved money, and I got thinking, if I use that money for that, I may not have enough money left for this other upcoming expense that I know is coming. And so I was kind of debating with God a little bit about it, and the same would be true if the grace bomb that God gives to you to do involves your time. And you might think, well, man, if I do that, then I won't have time for, or if it involves some ability, what if, if I do that, then I won't have the ability I need to do something else or whatever. And so there's a lot of ways that you and I could face fear when it comes to this issue of grace bombing people. Sounds cool, but kind of scary because, well, we just don't know. And it's always hard, I think, to get outside of your comfort zone for Jesus, to exercise grace. So because of that, we're going to look at Gideon today, because here's a guy who was afraid to do what God had called him to do. So let's just get to know Gideon before we look at a particular chapter in his life, okay? Gideon lived during the time of the Judges, and the time of the Judges was a time in Israel's history where they repeatedly broke the promises that they had made to God as part of the Old Covenant. And every time they did that, God kept his promises. And one of God's promises was that he would send consequences to wake them up and bring them back. So one of the consequences God had promised to send was crop failure. And if that didn't work, if they didn't connect the dots, like, hey, wait a minute, nothing's growing like it should. Oh yeah, God promised that if we didn't keep our promises, he would make it so our crops wouldn't grow right. If that didn't work, there were other levels of consequences. One of them was God said eventually he'll send in foreign invaders into your country. Well, that happened. And it happened repeatedly. And every time it happened, over time, the Israelites would get frustrated and really struggling and really want to see an end to those consequences. And so they would cry out to God and they would beg for deliverance. And then God, because he's merciful, not because they deserved it, not because they cried out, but because God is merciful, God would send a leader to them who would fight the invaders. And every time God did that, then that leader would lead them and God would supernaturally win the battle for Israel. Then Israel would turn around and make that leader, that military leader, their new judge or their new political leader. And during the lifetime of that new judge, they would pretty much follow God's covenant. They would keep the commitments that they had made as long as the judge was still alive. And then when the judge died, it was same song, second verse, a little louder, a little worse. Gideon was alive during one of these many cycles of this pattern. And at this particular point in Israel's history, they're at the foreign invader stage, and the Midianites are coming in by the thousands. These are desert nomads. They would come in with their camels. Israel would plant crops, and just at harvest season, boom, in would come the Midianites. They would steal what they could, destroy the rest of anything they could find, crops. They'd steal sheep and other livestock. And so Israel was in bad shape financially. Poverty, hunger were very real things for them. Which leads to the conversation we're going to look at today. This is a meeting that takes place in a wine press. In a hollowed out, dug out section, we find Gideon. He is there hiding in the wine press, trying to thresh a little bit of the wheat that he was able to harvest. Judges chapter 6, verse 12. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor." Now, time out. There's a lot more to this exchange. We're going to look at all the rest of it. But every time I read this, I kind of laugh a little bit. And maybe I shouldn't. Maybe Gideon was an impressive mighty man of valor. But it doesn't, escape my notice that he was hiding in a wine press when the angel showed up and said, "God's with you, mighty man of valor." So that just kind of cracks me up every time. Back to the story. And Gideon said to him, "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his wonderful deeds that our fathers recounted to us, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and given us into the hand of Midian." I think a lot of us can relate to this conversation. Not completely. We're not besieged by Midianites. I haven't seen too many camels around lately. But that same idea that Gideon had, like, hey, wait a minute. Something's not right here. If God is with us, then why is all this bad stuff happening right now? I think a lot of us can relate to that question, that sentiment. And the second part that Gideon expressed was this kind of a somewhere between frustration and just deep disappointment and perhaps hopelessness. Like, how come all the stories about God's intervention are in the past and I don't have any stories of my recent past and God intervening? These are the questions that Gideon asked this angel. Well, back to the text, verse 14. And the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you?" Now, the angel didn't answer his question. He just gave Gideon a grace bomb to drop on Israel, right? The angel said, "Here's your grace bomb, so to speak, Gideon. I'm sending you to mobilize the people of Israel, and through you and them, I'm going to save all of Israel from the hand of Midian." Now, it wasn't that the question was ignored completely. I mean, God had already sent a prophet to tell the people why things were this bad. He'd already said it's because of your idolatry and covenant breaking. So the angel didn't really need to answer the question that Gideon gave to him. Instead, the angel gave Gideon a grace bomb to drop. Well, now Gideon shifts his focus. Verse 15. And he said to them, "Please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." In other words, Gideon said, how could this be? I'm a nobody. I'm a nobody. As I read that, I wonder who was telling the truth here. Was the angel telling the truth when he called Gideon a mighty man of valor? Or was Gideon telling the truth when he claimed to be a nobody? Or were both things true? I'm not going to answer that. Just leave you to ponder that. I tried to think of what it would be like if I was to have this conversation with God, or maybe if you were having it with God or an angel, maybe it goes something like this. What? No, I can't do that. I come from a small, not really super spiritual family. And besides, I'm not really highly respected. I can't talk well, and people don't look up to me. Nobody follows me. I'm not much of a leader. And in fact, more people pick on me than follow me. Maybe that's how we would express it. But the idea would be the same. I think so many of us can relate to Gideon. We find ourselves saying things like, I can't put myself out there. I don't have the resources to drop that grace bomb. I'm not, and you fill in the blank. I'm not fearless and maybe name somebody that who's fearless when it comes to sharing their faith. Or, God, I'm not rich. I'm not financially well off. Or I don't have an abundance of free time. God, I've got responsibilities, and I've got all these other things. I'm busy, and God, in fact, I'm overwhelmed, and I'm stressed. God, I can't do this. Or God, I can't help that person. I'm not handy. I don't have those kinds of skills. They need somebody, and you fill in the blank. Or God, I just wouldn't know what to say. I'm not good with words, and I'm not good with strangers. My mom told me don't talk to strangers, and that's about the only skill I got. I've mastered that one. God, I can't put myself out there. I can't do that thing that you're challenging me to do. Into this fear that Gideon had came a promise. Verse 16. And the Lord said to him, but I will be with you, and you shall strike the Midianites as one man. Gideon was looking at the size of this grace bomb. There were thousands and thousands of Midianites, and God says, listen, I'm going to go with you. I'm going to go with you. Let that sink in, Gideon. And you're going to strike them as if they're not thousands, but just one. Well, as you fast forward through the story, you see that God continues to show up, and Gideon receives several personal grace bombs from God, ways that God gives Gideon unexpected kindness. Gideon says to the angels, I don't know about all this, but if you really like me as much as you say you do, if I've really found favor with God as much as you say I have, then I want you to stay here for a bit. I'm going to run off. I'll prepare you a meal, and I'll bring it back, and maybe we can talk about that. And so Gideon ran off, prepared the meal, got back. The angel was still there. The angel said, listen, I want you to take the meal and just put it right on that rock right over there. Put the little bread cakes, put the little meat there. Take the broth you made for me, pour that on top. And then the angel took his staff, touched the meal, and poof, instantaneous flame. The meal went up in smoke. Burnt dinner. But no, that wasn't the point. It was to show that God had accepted that meal as an offering, a sacrificial offering to God. So verse 22 says, when Gideon realized that this was the angel of the Lord, then he said, oh no, Lord God, I've seen the angel of the Lord face to face, which Gideon was saying, look, oh no, I've seen God's angel. I'm going to die. And the angel hollers back to him, peace be to you. Don't be afraid. You're not going to die, right? Right. And then later that night, God gave Gideon another instruction. God said, listen, I want you to take your bull and your dad's bull, and I want you to go use those two bulls to pull down the giant altar to the god Baal that your dad has built. And then I want you to cut down the giant pole that was a reference to another idol. I want you to cut up that huge pole, and then take all the rocks from the idol or from the altar your dad had, build them into an appropriate altar for God. Take the pole that you've cut up, put it on top, then take your dad's bull, kill it, burn it as an offering on top. This is outside of Gideon's comfort zone, to be sure. But Gideon did it, and over the course of the night, took 10 guys. They got the job done. In the morning, the townspeople wake up. They notice that the giant pole and the giant altar are gone, and there's a new altar built, and there's a little bit of smoldering bull coming from the top. And so they come up to Gideon's dad, who, you would expect to be absolutely outraged, and they say, listen, we've done a little investigation, found out your son, Gideon, did all this. Hand him over. We're going to kill him for desecrating the idols of these gods. And to Gideon's absolute surprise, his dad defended him against the mob. That's grace bomb number 2 from God to Gideon, right? And a very unexpected kindness. And then Gideon continues, to have his doubts and to wonder, will God really do this? I mean, God, will you really show up for me or not? And I guess you can relate to that. I know I can. And so Gideon did the thing that many of us have heard about with a fleece. He said, God, listen, if you really do what you said, I'm going to put a lamb's wool out. And tonight when the dew comes, I want it to be completely wet on the fleece, but I want the ground around it to be dry, because that would be a miracle. And God humored Gideon. This is not a pattern for you and me to follow, this thing with the fleece. God humored him and did what Gideon asked. And then Gideon said, God, please don't be angry with me, but I'm still not 100% sure. And so he said, I'm going to put the fleece out again tonight, but I want the opposite to happen. I want the fleece to stay dry, but just put a real huge heavy dew out on the lawn. And God did that. So that was another personal grace bomb from God to Gideon, this whole thing with the fleece. And then God took him and said, I'm going to help you, Gideon, really know that it was me that did this for you. And so Gideon had been mobilizing troops, and 32,000 from Israel came and were willing to go to battle. And God said, listen, Gideon, I'm going to help you whittle this down so that I give you a manageable number, number one, but really so that you can know that it was me who did this for you. And so by the time God got done, there were no longer 32,000. There were only 300 warriors left. But God wanted Gideon to know, I'm going to go with you. I'm going to be the difference maker, and I'm going to fight this battle. So that was a personal grace bomb. And then one more God did for Gideon. It was nighttime, and God said to Gideon, listen, if you're still struggling with this, you're still wondering if I'm going to show up, sneak down to the edge of the Midianite camp, and I'll give you a confirmation. So Gideon and his servant went down. I can only imagine the terror they had as they're sneaking into this camp, knowing if they get caught, it's sudden death. And as they come up to a tent on the edge of the camp, they can hear 2 soldiers on the other side in the tent talking. And the one soldier says, man, I had this dream. And the other says, well, what was it? And he said, in my dream, a dinner roll came rolling down the hill, hit our tent, and bam, just completely flattened the tent, the whole tent. The soldier said, well, duh, your dream means something, and there's only one logical explanation for what your dream means. The dinner roll is Gideon, and we're the tent. We're going to get flattened by this guy. Wow. Confirmation, right? Another personal grace bomb, an act of kindness from God to Gideon. Gideon rose up with his servant, ran back up to the camp where his 300 men were, and said, it's time to attack. And they were ready to go, and off they went. And God won the battle for Gideon and his men. And as I think about that, there were 2 additional grace bombs, personal grace bombs Gideon received as a result. One was life without these Midianite oppressors anymore, right? And second, probably the biggest of them all, the experience of having done something with God and seeing God come through for him. One of the tragedies, I think, of our time is so many people who are believers who don't have a personal story of seeing God at work through them and through their church in a way that can only be God. And God gave Gideon that grace bomb, a personal experience of God. Well, that's all well and good, right? Happy for you, Gideon. But here's the deal. Gideon's story reminds us of our own set of promises from God. God isn't going to do probably the thing with a fleece for you and me. And he's probably not going to do the thing where the sign of fire as he burns the meal. And he's probably not going to take you down to somebody's house or car or workplace so you can hear a dream that's about you. But let's talk about what has God told you and what has he given to you and to me. Number one, you are mighty. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26, "For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful, and not many were of noble birth." Now, if you read that with me, you may think, whoa, Pastor Andy, you are really messing the head, because that does not sound like God looking at us and saying, you are mighty, and you would be right. Paul is saying, listen, Christians, pay attention. Not many of you are mighty, right? Not many of you are wise according to worldly standards. Not many of you have power. Not many of you have noble birth. Not many of you were born to privilege. Not many of you are rich. Not many of you are highly respected. Not many of you have the skills that are highly prized in our culture, whether it's, athletic abilities or things like that. It sounds like the opposite of what I just said. God isn't looking at us and saying, you're mighty. He's saying, no, you're not wise. You're not powerful. You're not noble. You're not privileged. You're not impressive in any kind of way. But you catch the first part? He says, for consider your calling. Don't just consider how you feel or what you look like or your status. Consider your calling. He says, you, though you are not wise or powerful or privileged, you are called, and catch the rest of it. You are called here. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even the things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. Your calling was to be a nobody that shows off just how impressive God is. Your calling is to be mighty in the hand of God. God wants to use people who are not powerful to totally upend those who are, in order to show that power doesn't come through our own strength. Power comes from being in the hand of God. God wants to use people who are not Nobel Prize winners to show what real wisdom is like. And God wants to use people who are not well known to show the fleetingness of popularity, but what God can do through people who don't seemingly have a ton of influence and a ton of followers. You are called to be wielded by God, and that makes you mighty, not because you're mighty on your own, but you're in the mighty hand of God, and therefore a mighty warrior. We are all nobodies, but mighty in the hand of the Lord. Second, you are sent. You're mighty and you're sent. John 20, verse 21, Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, even so I'm sending you." Now, Jesus was talking to his disciples shortly before he went back to heaven, and he said, as the Father has sent me, so I'm sending you. Now, clearly, Jesus was sent by the Father. And just as clearly, he sent his followers, including us. And when God sends, this is so important, when God sends, he provides the resources. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 8. "And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work." That word "all" shows up a lot in that verse, but also abound, right? Grace abound toward you, so that you may abound in every good work. When you and I give ourselves out, or give of ourselves, or we pour ourselves out because we see an opportunity, and with humility and compassion we meet that need, God provides. What God calls us to, he provides for. Over a decade ago, Mara and I were trying to figure out, was God indeed calling us into missions? And so we made a trip down to the headquarters of ABWE, and we had several meetings on that day. And one of them was with the finance officer. And what he did for us in that meeting was he said, well, let me ask you a few questions, and I've got some data from Portugal and stuff. And he said, I'll give you an amount of money that you will need to raise, number one, in order to get there, and number two, how much you would need in order to stay on the field, and how much money, how much support will you need per month in order to be a missionary there in Portugal. And when he gave us that number, I was like ready to be done right there. I was like, there's no way. This is impossible. It was a big number. Both of them were big numbers. The amount of money it took to get there was going to be more than what it cost us to buy our house. And the monthly amount, it just seemed staggering. And he probably saw the look on my face of just that complete unbelief. Like, there's no way. We could never raise that. We come from a small church. I don't have rich friends. I don't have a whole lot of money. I don't have a patent that I could sell and live off the royalties. I mean, all that was going through my mind. And he looked across his desk and he said these words. He said, I found that God pays for whatever he orders. In other words, God doesn't put in an order and say, hey, look, I want to send a family over here to Portugal, but then not find a way to pay for it. Those of you who've known us over those last 10 years know that God did indeed pay for what he ordered. God calls us and then he provides for us when he sends us. So if God sends us to do a grace bomb, he'll provide what is needed for us to be able to meet that need that he's calling us to meet in the grace bomb. One more thing. You've got numbers. Matthew 28, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. And behold, I'm with you always to the end of the age. I thought about this question this week. Would I be willing to drop a grace bomb if someone else went with me? I'm kind of self-conscious, insecure. And so if somebody else is willing to go with me, would I be willing to drop the grace bomb then? Well, I'd be much more likely for sure, right? And maybe that would be your testimony too. You're like, well, if you'll go with me, then I'll do it. That's the exact question that Jesus addressed here in this passage. He says, behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. I am not alone. We are not alone when we step out in faith, when we are stepping out to where Jesus already is. One of the things I'm learning to tell myself is that no matter what situation I arrive at, Jesus got there first. And that includes the scary, stressful stuff, the things that would cause anxiety in me. Those situations, Jesus got there first. I'm now joining in a place where he's already at work. But that also includes those times when he sends us out to go grace bomb somebody. Jesus got there first, and he's already there, and he will stay with me while we do this grace bomb thing together. So you got fear. I hear you. I really do. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the disregard of fear. I want us to be reminded today, you are a grace-built person made to grace bomb people. You were made for this. You were made for this. And the works that God is calling you to do were prepared for you, not for somebody like you, not for somebody near you. You were made for this, and these works were prepared for you. You're a grace-built person made to grace bomb people. You're a grace-built person resourced to grace bomb people. And you are a grace-built person accompanied by Jesus as you step out of your comfort zone to grace bomb people. Man, I hope that's an encouragement. Please, send me your stories. I want to be encouraged. I want to share them with others. I'll take out the identifying details, but would love to hear about how God is using you and God is making a difference, doing what you were made to do. One story as we close, I found out this week One of our members had a coworker who was just having a really bad day, making a whole lot of mistakes. And God laid it on this Christian from our church and said, hey, I want you to grace bomb this person. And so that person from our church went ahead and did something that was meaningful to this coworker who was struggling with making mistakes. And it meant the world to the person who received that, and just thank them over and over again. Thank you for sharing that story with us. Thank you for loading. Thank you for listening. Thank you for letting it go. May God bless you as you grace bomb this week.